On the streets of Yangon, it's still possible to conjure up images of time gone by. Under the British Empire, the city was known as Rangoon, and imposing imperial buildings still lie in a landscape of golden pagodas. But Myanmar's economic stagnation and isolation from the outside world unwittingly saved the city's magnificent colonial buildings. A unique mix of cultural and imperial architecture still stands as it has for decades, the largest collection of buildings of this kind anywhere in Southeast Asia. Myanmar's former capital, Yangon, is in a race against time to preserve one of the most spectacular early 20th century landscapes in Asia. I'm Aela Callan. On this edition of 101 East, we take a rare look inside Yangon's historic buildings and meet the people shaping a future around the city's unique past.
In Burma, victory is celebrated by a great military parade in Rangoon. The expected monsoon broke just before celebrations began, but to the tough fighters of many nations, it was just another monsoon.
By the end of World War II, the romance of old Rangoon had been immortalised in newsreels and the words of famous poets and writers. 6 decades of British rule lasted until 1948. Rangoon was a modern and thriving city. In 1962, the country fell into the hands of the military, marking the beginning of socialist rule. Poverty and neglect ensued. But Myanmar's economic stagnation and isolation from the outside world unwittingly saved the city's spectacular colonial buildings. Although much is decaying and run down, Yangon now has the largest surviving collection of colonial architecture anywhere in Southeast Asia.
For a long time, the history of the city was really not taught in schools at all. This is the place where the Myanmar people learned to be modern. It's where they connected with the outside world. It's where they listened to jazz for the first time or read Karl Marx. It's where their greatest writers, artists, statesmen lived and worked for decades.
What's in all these buildings then?
These are government offices, but they're often half empty or some of them are not used at all.
Thant Mint Oo is an historian who founded the Yangon Heritage Trust. We're in the historic financial heart of British Burma on Lower Pansadan Street. Trade once flourished in these banks and fine department stores, and the Irrawaddy Flotilla Company operated the largest river fleet on earth.
I think you can imagine, especially on this street, so many of these buildings could be renovated, done up, found a new lease of life.
Thant returned to Myanmar after years living abroad. He's been creating a museum at the home of his grandfather, U Thant, who was Secretary General of the United Nations in the 1960s and 70s. But his mission goes far beyond family history. He has been driving Myanmar's government to protect historic buildings by law and develop a cohesive urban plan.
Having this kind of city downtown where you can walk around, which is green, which has interesting old architecture, an interesting mix of architecture, old and new. This is a priceless asset. And it's partly about trying to save this before it's too late.
Ever since a nominally civilian government was handed power in Myanmar 2 years ago, investors, developers and buyers have flooded in, highly aware of Yangon's huge untapped potential. Land is at a premium, cheap, fast construction is springing up, and rents have been pushed up to San Francisco levels. It's estimated that 1 million new housing units will be needed in the city by 2040. Yangon's lawmakers have struggled to keep up with the pace of change. Amid the boom, Thant worries about what will happen to hundreds of low-income families who live in dilapidated buildings throughout the city.
I mean, I think for me, the worst thing is that the buildings are torn down. The second worst thing is that this becomes a sanitized tourist zone that's good for tourists and rich people, and all the old poor families have to leave. So we have to find a solution which encourages as many of the old communities to stay as possible.
When I moved here, I was 8 or 9 years old. The house was very big. We would play, my friends would come, and we had the run of the house.
Do La San Win and her family have lived inside the dome at the top of a former luxury department store for 40 years. Built by Isaac Sofer, a Jewish trader from Baghdad in 1906, this was where fancy cigarettes and candy were sold during colonial times. Today the building is derelict, home to around 20 families, some law offices, an art gallery and a guest house.
Before it was good. All of the ceilings were very smooth. The tiles were not broken like this. They were very good. When we first arrived here, it wasn't a pigsty. But then too many people just came and lived here.
She remembers playing in the courtyard on the original tiles imported from Manchester. Now it's an open sewer. Like many buildings in Yangon, ownership is held by multiple parties. As owners passed away, their descendants inherited a mess of unpaid repair bills and government taxes. La San Win and her husband are holding on. In 1972, they paid the equivalent of $35 for their apartment, which is now a potential gold mine. The fate of the building in Yangon's new age is unclear. Restoration will be expensive, and many consider it cheaper to build something new. La San Win knows life could change, but is reluctant to move.
My house is so beautiful. I've made myself a home in a very nice place. Out on this balcony, it's like an oasis in the middle of the city. It feels like a mansion with a garden sitting on its own.
She's not the only one afraid that downtown is losing its old world charm. Aung So Min owns the Pansadan Art Gallery. He's on a crusade to stop the spread of soulless condominiums springing up next to the heritage buildings, and he despairs that treasures like this are plastered with modern advertising.
Now it's the most beautiful building become very ugly on the street. If it's like nice and uniform and also nice good maintenance with also the color or appearance, then I think this is the place that a lot of people will come and look and happy and you know.
Developers began knocking down this 120-year-old terrace, but agreed to keep the facade after Aung So Min caused a stir on social media. He says Myanmar people are in a rush to modernise and don't appreciate the beauty of old buildings, which are suffering from a lack of regulation.
So Ko Aung, you started collecting all of these.
Over the years, Aung So Min has been salvaging parts of Yangon's visual history, as well as discarded treasures.
So they were just sitting on the street?
Yeah, on the street.
What, things like this?
Yeah, this also like these are also like the maps, like old maps of Yangon from time to time.
Look, all hand-drawn, yeah?
Yeah, this is also hand-drawn. But the problem is like in Myanmar is that no one never collect these kind of things. These are like that you can see the year are like 1887, 1888.
Wow, 1887.
Yeah, this is Yangon municipality. So these are very early records about how they built Yangon and also like that. This is like one of the rare records in the colonial age, like 1931. So these kind of things are like a missing piece of the history.
It feels like it might even just disintegrate in my hands.
The fabric of Pansadan Street is just as fragile. Aung So Min fears it will become a condo-lined car park, losing its attractive trees and bookstores, with the heritage buildings lost amongst high-rises.
This is also the thing that we have to maintain these older buildings to remember the past, to learn the past, to understand the past. If we lost these buildings, Yangon is also another living factory. I think this is also no aesthetic, no artistic, like mental food.
In an old mansion uptown, artist So Cho-zo knows little about the history of the grand palace he works in. Built in 1919 as the home of Chinese business tycoon Lim Chin-song, it now houses the government-run Yangon Art School, an incubator for many of Myanmar's top contemporary artists.
This building, I don't know how to describe it. I would only be able to say that the architecture of this building is a little strange. It's not like the others. It has a Chinese style. From what I've seen, it includes British styles as well. The two designs are mixed together. It's not Myanmar design.
The Ministry of Culture, which is responsible for the mansion, tried to dissuade us from filming here, saying that it was too ugly. But its striking proportions form a great training ground for the artists. So Cho-zo's latest series of paintings are aptly titled Ugly or Beauty.
In my opinion, this building is, in terms of architecture, it's beautiful in my opinion. The next generation should be able to see this kind of architecture. I want to show the new generation this.
As the city around him changes, so does the style of art that So Cho-zo and other Myanmar artists are producing. He believes in embracing the new without sacrificing the old.
Hi, Cyrus.
Hello, Ella.
I'm Ella.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thanks for having us here. What a wonderful building.
Thank you so much.
What did it used to be?
This was the former headquarters of the Burma Railway Company.
Okay.
This was during the colonial times. It was built in 1877, so almost 140 years old now.
Cyrus Pun is a developer who's turning one of the city's most prominent heritage buildings into a luxury boutique hotel.
This hotel will be part of a bigger project, part of a mixed-use development where we have some offices space, another hotel and service apartment, and some residences as well, and a retail mall.
Cyrus, is it difficult to make a refurbishment like this economically viable?
If you are purely financially driven, you probably want to knock it down and build a new one. Of course, we look at our investment in this building with a much longer perspective.
Cyrus hired heritage architects who are investigating the original colours and materials used in the building to make the restoration as authentic as possible. He says poorly managed renovations are even more of a threat to Yangon's heritage buildings than bulldozers.
I think it's very important down to the individual developers to make sure that they don't ruin the cityscape. They don't destroy a heritage that has been a long history and an important part of the city. So there needs to be some social responsibility to that. At the same time, there needs to be the right balance between making something that's financially feasible and the long-term and sustainable.
In 3 or 4 years' time, the railway building will be restored to a grander scale than it ever was. But it will be in a sea of more modern buildings, something that may be inevitable in the name of economic progress. 100 years ago, royalty, celebrities and artists arrived in the city along the river. Today, this historic riverfront is slowly being revived. A modern bar called The Union has recently given Yangon's Red Cross building a new lease of life.
Everything here has been more complex from start to finish. From finding skilled labour to do anything from upholstery to carpentry to all the mechanical and electrical engineering, finding that necessary skill was really much more complex. And then we've just been constantly hounded by the level of corruption here and the difficulty with getting anything done without having to do under the table deals every single step of the way.
Owner NICO ELLIOT says laws governing foreign investment in Myanmar are still somewhat unclear.
There's a lot of people here looking at opportunities, a lot of discussion about that, but actually very little action because of perhaps still the risk, perhaps the level of investment, the lack of certainty about what the political situation might be. So I guess combining those two, you're not going to necessarily look to the old buildings and look to go into those and restore them.
This makes buildings, like the wooden Pegu Club, owned by the Department of Defence, both a renovator's dream and a potential nightmare. This was once a gentleman's club, the epitome of British colonialism, immortalised as the place where Rudyard Kipling was inspired to write the famous poem Mandalay. It was later used as a dormitory for government employees and an army accounts office. In its heyday, only British were allowed into the club, and these days few locals even know it's here or want to go inside. The caretaker warned us about ghosts before leaving us to wander the halls alone.
Being here evokes a sense of romanticism and faded glory, but for some it's a reminder of a past Myanmar would rather forget. Restoring colonial-era buildings just isn't a priority in a nation that's forging itself a new beginning.
The Yangon City Development Committee has a list of 188 buildings that are protected, but the Pegu Club is not one of them. A lack of appreciation and a lack of funds mean Myanmar's government is forced to look elsewhere for creative solutions to save heritage buildings like this one.
In the short term or even the medium term, the amount of money that's going to be required for many of these buildings or for a comprehensive effort, I think is beyond the ability of the government at a time when there are so many other priorities as well.
Some long-term leases have been awarded to private companies, which has prompted a flurry of public protest. A local businessman wanted to convert the top floor of the majestic High Court building into a law library and museum. But a network of lawyers managed to stop it, protesting on the grounds that it was a privately funded venture. Now they're suing the government for leasing another law court building to developers who are converting it into a luxury hotel.
If someone wants to renovate as a hotel, so they can buy another place. They can build another place, any building as they like. Because we are telling about our national heritage value, historical value.
The lawyers say there's a lack of transparency around the way the government awards private contracts to developers. Although work has begun on the Small Causes Court, the lawyers are vowing to fight on. A few streets away, work is also beginning on one of Myanmar's most treasured buildings. The Secretariat stands at the heart of the city, yet it's remained shrouded in mystery for more than half a century. Originally built as the seat of colonial British administration, the 120-year-old building sprawls across almost 16 acres of land, an entire city block. The complex was declared off-limits to the public by the military in 1962, and few have ever seen inside. It's become synonymous with the exclusion of the Myanmar people from their national history, and a symbol of the country's vast potential waiting to be unlocked.
This wing is the one they first built in 1890, and then it took them 3 years to finish this wing, and then they continued the other two wings.
So the buildings were built in different stages?
Yes, phase by phase.
It's amazing, you almost feel like a princess walking down here.
Yes, the colonial architectural design is so gorgeous.
I think everyone has seen from the outside this building, but when you get inside it, it's so much bigger than you think, isn't it?
Yes, it's a wonder.
Yeah, a real wonder.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we are working closely together with heritage architects.
Once again, it's private funding that's driving the restoration effort. Le Yiso is the managing director of the ANAWMAR Art Group, which was awarded the lease on the Secretariat to turn it into a museum and cultural centre.
I envision this as a public place where everybody can come and enjoy this national building, and then everybody can better understand our history and culture.
It's very unusual for the government to award a private group like you guys who have, not done this before. Why do you think they did that?
It's a good question. Our art director is a very famous artist called Nemyose, and then we have other board directors who have collected thousands of paintings and other art pieces. So we want to showcase our collection here.
Along with thousands of paintings, the ANAWMAR Group is pouring $30 million of their own money into the restoration. Their 2-year plan will see more than half of the building converted into museums, painting galleries and exhibition halls. Restaurants and cafes in a separate wing of the complex will help to offset some of the costs. Later, there are plans to create seminar halls and offices, but it's unclear how that will be funded.
Right now we are doing the site cleaning and preparation for the restoration process. We are putting up the scaffoldings to clean the walls, removing algae and trees, and then later we'll continue with the painting process.
The group collaborated with the Yangon Heritage Trust on a technical study of the building and possible options for it. International experts conceded that at least $100 million will be needed to restore the building properly.
I don't think anyone's going to provide that money for free. I think the question is where that money is going to come from. Is it going to be from commercializing part of the building, or is it going to come from a broader plan or a broader scheme through which money derived elsewhere from the lease or revenues from other buildings or from tourism in general goes into renovating and keeping the Secretariat in the state that it should be in.
The Secretariat holds important historical significance for Myanmar. Independence from Britain was declared here, and the nation's first parliament was convened inside this building. It's also where national hero General Aung San was assassinated in 1947, an event that changed the course of the country's history. He was gunned down along with 6 cabinet colleagues in this first-floor meeting room. It was converted into a Buddhist shrine by the military government, but it's said that behind the wood panelling you can still see the bullet holes from the spray of gunfire. The art group hope General Aung San's daughter, opposition leader Aung San Suu Kyi, will advise them on restoring the room to its original state as part of a memorial museum.
Oh wow, these rooms are incredible. They just keep going and going. Being here is like almost stepping back in time. You feel almost like you're on the set of the movie The Titanic. I think it's really sad that the people of Myanmar haven't been able to come here and feel the weight of the history that's within these walls. Hopefully soon that'll change.
The Secretariat endured bombing by Japanese warplanes in World War II, an earthquake and Cyclone Nargis in 2008. Its next challenge is surviving the modern era. It sits at the epicenter of a city on the cusp of great change, one that could see Yangon become Asia's next monolithic metropolis, or a unique place where diversity and history is celebrated and saved.